Right, so UFC 291 goes down this weekend live from Salt Lake City in Utah. The main event is obviously Dustin Poirier against Justin Gaethje for the BMF title. Let's preview the show, shall we? But before we do, my name is Rahul J. Chan. This is the Battle Camp. Thank you very much for joining me. If you're new to the channel, please do consider subscribing. So look, man, when I think about a card during fight week, the way I gauge the level of excitement and anticipation that I have for the fights on Saturday night is I sit there and I think to myself, is this a card that you're willing to stay awake for? Is this a card that you're willing to stay up all night to watch these fights live and direct from your bedroom? And the answer to this question is a resounding yes, because the main event itself, the main event fight itself is enough for me to want to stay up, right? But the rest of the card is so stacked. I don't know what Salt Lake City and Utah have done to deserve such top quality cards, because I think the last time the UFC went there was for Leon Edwards against Kamaru Usman. So now look, I'm not going to try and go into detail and break these fights down because there's so many. I'm just going to give you a few tidbits about each of the fights, give my prediction, so I can come back and revisit this video early next week when I record my my review of UFC 291. Is that fair? Is that okay? Right, let's start. So Dustin Poirier against Justin Gaethje. Now look, if someone said to me, like, here are all the ingredients in the world, and here, Rahul, have these ingredients, and you can create two fighters to have an you can create two fighters to have the most entertaining fight known to man. The ingredients that I would use would create Dustin Poirier and Justin Gaethje. Like, the first time they fought was very, very, very entertaining. But since they fought the first time, it was what, 4 years ago or something like that? Both of these guys have improved exponentially. Justin Gaethje has gone from, hey man, I just wanna put on a show for the fans. And I've always thought that whole thing of wanting to put on a show for the fans, that being the primary objective of any fighter, is a facade and it's a lie. And I'm going to come on to that a bit later on. But Justin Gaethje has gone from being that guy to being partially that guy, but also a guy that likes to break his opponents down, think about his fight, and think about his strategy for a fight, and try to implement the strategy that's been given to him by his coach. Dustin Poirier is a guy that has just been in the UFC since the dawn of day. Like, I can't remember. Like, Dustin Poirier has been in the UFC for what, 10? I should just check this up, because I'm pretty sure he's been in the UFC for like 10 years or something like that. And in that whole time, all he's done is just improve, change weight division, improve. He was here since UFC 125 back in 2011, January 2011. That's when he made his UFC debut. That's how long he's been here. He's part of the furniture. But like a nice antique, his value has grown as he's gotten older. Do you know what I mean? But when I think about these two guys squaring off in the ring, aside from the fact that it's destined to be extremely entertaining, I can't help but feel that the steps in improvement that Dustin Poirier has made far outweigh the steps that Chandler has made. Not Chandler, why am I saying Chandler? Gaethje has made. Probably because Chandler's fought both of these two guys. And I'm going to give you my prediction earlier. I reckon Poirier beats Gaethje. But the beauty of this fight is both of these men have the power and the aggressive nature in the way they fight to hurt each other. And they're both very good finishers. So there's always going to be jeopardy in this fight. There's always going to be a sense of... You know that feeling you get when something happens in a fight? That will just be you throughout the fight, because it's such a top quality fight in terms of entertainment value and in terms of how physically good both of these men are. I feel like the main difference between both of these two is, obviously, I feel like Dustin Poirier is a better boxer, but also when both of these guys are met with adversity, I feel like Dustin Poirier is able to think his way out of it. Whereas I feel like Gaethje, when he's facing adversity, he has that kind of mentality of fuck it and just starts throwing haymakers. And that necessarily isn't the best tactic to get yourself out of a dangerous situation. And I feel like that will be something that will play into how this fight is eventually won by Dustin Poirier. And that's why I'm going with Dustin Poirier. There's been a lot of talk about, this fight being for the BMF title. When it was announced, I tweeted about it saying this fight does not need this little trinket of this pretend belt that has been kind of just pushed out there because there isn't a legit title fight on this card. And I am not really someone that has a major issue with the BMF title itself. I just feel like it does both of these men a disservice. Like, this fight is so good independently. It doesn't need this little crutch of a title that no one, well, I shouldn't really say no one, I don't care about, right? Because there might be people out there that do care about the BMF title, and that's their prerogative, they're entitled to do so. But in my humble opinion, like, this fight is good enough to headline a pay-per-view without the UFC thrusting this pretend belt onto it, right? Because I feel like it's a bit degrading to both of these men. But if both of these guys are actually excited about competing for the BMF title, then who am I? Do you know what I mean? I just value both of these fighters so highly, and both of them in the octagon together is just something that personally it's every so often you get a fight that you get this excited for, because it's just destined to be a war and really entertaining. And this is one of those fights. Another fight that is on this sort of level is Jan Blachowicz against Alex Pereira, for different reasons. Because to me, I'm excited about the fight because I'm excited to see what Pereira is like at 205. Moving from middleweight to light heavyweight is the biggest jump you can make in terms of differences in weight classes, in weight divisions. But Alex Pereira, like, I've seen so many pictures of him outside of the octagon with Tyson Fury, for example, standing next to different, I think I saw a photo with him standing next to John Jones and things of that nature. And he doesn't look like he's, 2 weight divisions below both of these guys. He's just a huge man. So I'd love to, I'm excited to see how he performs where he isn't cutting so much weight. Because you've seen fighters that, cut a lot of weight and then they move up a weight class and you think to yourself, yeah, well, he's made the right choice there. And in that higher weight division, they don't perform to the same level that they're able to in the weight class below her. And I'm kind of stumbling over my words here because I'm trying to think of an example of that. I can't off the top of my head, but I think you guys know what I'm talking about, right? So Alex Pereira is coming into this light heavyweight division, and he's not just coming here to fight just anybody. He's fighting Jan Blachowicz, for God's sake. This guy is a former champion not so long ago, and he's a guy that has tools in his arsenal that could potentially give Alex Pereira trouble. Jan Blachowicz isn't one of these guys that Jan Blachowicz is a big light heavyweight, so this is a real test for Alex Pereira. He's jumping straight into the deep end of this division, and for that I rate him for taking this fight and for backing himself in this first fight in the light heavyweight division in the UFC. It'll be interesting to see how this fight starts off, because in my mind they're both going to probably try and kick the leg. So it will be interesting to see who gets the upper hand in that battle. It will be interesting to see whether Alex Pereira is able to start landing on Jan Blachowicz, and whether Jan Blachowicz decides, right, fuck this, let's start grappling, let's start wrestling. And if that happens, how does Alex Pereira defend those situations in the fight? This fight is exciting because there are so many unknowns, and if Alex Pereira is able to pull through, the potential of him fighting the Jamar Hills or the Yuri Prohatzkas of the world, like, he could be a 2-weight division champion within like 2 years of being in the UFC. That is some feat for someone that is already such an accomplished kickboxer. Like, he's already won belts in an entirely different sport, and he's come here, and look how he's 36 years old. It's not like he's a spring chicken. Do you know what I mean? But I don't know, man. Something tells me that Blachowicz is gonna get the is going to get the upset win in this fight. Maybe it's because there's just so many unknowns and potential pitfalls for Alex Pereira going into this fight. But if Alex Pereira beats Jan Blachowicz, then to me, he's just a legit mixed martial artist. He's not just this kickboxer whose journey to the middleweight title was carefully curated by the UFC so they could get this grudge match between him and Israel Adesanya. He's a mixed martial artist, and you can't argue against it. Do you know what I mean? Stephen Thompson against Michel Pereira. It's like a Street Fighter fight. You got one guy that bounces around and likes to kind of, when I say Street Fighter, I mean the computer game. It's like they're two characters. The difference in the way they style, but they both want to strike. Does that make sense? This is Pereira's big step up, and to me, it'll be interesting to see how he deals with Wonder Boy, even though Wonder Boy isn't the Wonder Boy that he used to be. Obviously, he's quite old. He must be 40 by now. How old is he? Let's have a look, shall we? Yeah, he's 40 years old. So, you know, he's clearly seen his best days, and it will be interesting to see whether Pereira is able to deal with the movement of Wonder Boy. It'll be interesting to see if Pereira tries to grapple and wrestle with Wonder Boy. The same way, you know, a Gilbert Burns did, for example. It'll be interesting to see Pereira tries his flashy shit, like jumping off the side of the cage to land a strike and that sort of thing. That would be on paper, it should be an interesting fight, but you know how these things go. You never know. Tony Ferguson against Bobby Green. Like, I've seen a lot of kind of talk in the media about Tony Ferguson. He pulled out a knife. In his media scrum yesterday. I got sent it by my friend James, and he was like, "Blades and shades, baby, blades and shades," talking about hunting bears and all sorts. Like, Tony Ferguson has always said things that to me haven't made sense. He's always lived in a bubble of disillusion in my mind. He's always, every single time he speaks to the media, he always talks about how his last camp wasn't good, but this time he's made the changes. Like, I've heard him literally before every single fight talk about how this time I've made the changes that I needed to make. This time I'm getting the right type of coaching. This time. It's always this time. And he goes in there and he's never looked like his former self after he got beaten by Gaethje. Right? Now, part of that is because he's been facing top caliber lightweights. Like, those losses to me have aged well, right? So let me just go through them, because what I mean by that is he lost to Gaethje, and then, you know, that was like, after the Gaethje loss, he lost to Oliveira, and at the time it was like, fucking hell, what's happened to Tony Ferguson? But then we've seen what Oliveira has gone on to do. He got dismantled by Beneil Dariush, and Dariush was obviously a top contender at lightweight until he lost his last fight. He got beaten by Michael Chandler, but by that time we already knew that Tony Ferguson had fallen below his top level, and Michael Chandler had already had a couple of fights in the UFC. So the point I'm trying to make is, like, he's been losing to the top boys in the division, whereas Bobby Green has had a checkered record of not fighting the top boys in the division. There's a lot of people that are kind of just picking Bobby Green. I'm not really that hasty with it, and I feel like Tony Ferguson, from what I understand, is quite a big underdog in this fight, and I'd be very tempted to bet on Tony Ferguson to beat Bobby Green come Saturday night. In fact, you know what? That's what I'm going to do. I predict that Tony Ferguson beats Bobby Green, and I'm going to put a bet on it as well. How about that? Finally, Michael Chiesa vs Kevin Holland. You know, a card like this, right? It always needs Kevin Holland on it. Do you know what I mean? Like, when UFC put together such a big, massive, fuck-off card like this, Kevin Holland always seems to kind of find a spot on the card. And he'll be fighting Michael Chiesa, and I feel like this is probably going to be Michael Chiesa's last ever fight in the UFC. Michael Chiesa, to me, is a throwback fighter that I haven't seen improve his striking enough for the time he's been in the sport. Do you know what I mean? He doesn't look comfortable on his feet. And as a result, a lot of the time when he fights someone that is good at striking, he struggles to close the distance and take him down. Kevin Holland, obviously, he has been taken down at will in previous fights at middleweight. So there is potential for Michael Chiesa to be able to take Kevin Holland down. I just feel like Kevin Holland will have too much on the feet, and if he does get taken down, it won't be at the start of every single round. That allows Michael Chiesa to win each round, if that makes sense. I feel like Kevin Holland will have too much for him. One other quick note of mention, Derek Lewis against Marco Rogerio de Lima. Derek Lewis, an ex-challenger for the belt not so long ago, is here in the prelims. And I just wanted to point that out, man. This is how the game goes, isn't it? This is how the cookie crumbles when it comes to mixed martial arts, especially the UFC. Derek Lewis has always been one of my guys. I've always enjoyed watching him inside the octagon. I've always enjoyed following his Instagram page, and I've always enjoyed listening to his interviews. So as a fan, I hope this one goes his way. But anyway, these are all my thoughts about UFC, right? I just wanted to finish by letting you in on a secret. I'm going to be watching this card, right? I'm going to be watching this live. But the second Bud Crawford and Errol Spence enter that ring, I'm not going to lie to you, I have to change the channel. I have to change the channel and start watching the boxing, because this is a card of the year candidate on paper, right? But that boxing match, that is a generational boxing match. That is a fight that people have been talking about literally for years. That is a fight where you've got two guys that are not just the best in the division, but in the conversation for being the best boxers in the world. And they happen to be in the same weight division. And they're fighting each other relatively in their prime. And that doesn't happen so often. So that's a fight that I'll be watching as soon as it starts. I'll be changing channels. And look, I'm a fan of mixed martial arts. If I had a choice, I could only watch one sport for the rest of my life. It would be MMA all day long. Twice on a Sunday, as Stone Cold Steve Austin once said. But this boxing match, it just is too significant to not watch live. Now, I've said all of that, and it's very likely that I'll probably fall asleep and wake up at like 9 o'clock in the morning, and then look at my phone for the time, and I'll see some notifications telling me who won in the MMA and who won in the boxing, and my whole day will be ruined. But I will try my level best to stay awake all night long. Anyway, those are my thoughts about UFC 291. Feel free to share your thoughts in the comments below. Feel free to react to anything that I've said in this video. Feel free to share any of your thoughts about any of the fights that I've discussed in this video. One thing, sorry, that I forgot to mention, that the altitude, Salt Lake City, like Leon Edwards was adamant that the altitude played a part in the way he performed against Kamaru Usman, despite the fact that he won the fight. He felt as though that wasn't the best version of himself. And then we saw a massive improvement in the fight, in the trilogy fight with Kamaru Usman when they fought at the O2 in London. So will the altitude be an X factor in any of these fights? It's hard to say. But I hope it doesn't. I hope it doesn't have an impact on these fights, because on paper, this card has been curated to a high level. Yeah, these are my thoughts, and please do subscribe if you got to this. If you've got 19 minutes into this video, hit the fucking subscribe button if you haven't already. I'll catch you guys next time.